Don't forget the national NSRC, they are not afraid, they are afraid to
on this issue of the taxi rank.
That's an accident.
Now, comrades, in front of you, because comrades, let's
that's what say they don't want to die.
now, comrades, we are going to ask the Vice Chancellor that as he responds to this memorandum, he also responds on the question of the taxi rank. Because his office and the Office of Management is a main campus, perhaps they don't see the carnage that is here.
Yes.
Perhaps they don't see the suffering that we are going through.
Yes.
Now he promised, Professor Makhanya, and David, Principal. He said, I'm going to engage with the executive mayor, Sindane, don't worry, that issue is sorted out.
We're there.
In a mass meeting I came, I said, fellow students, don't worry. Principal Makhanya said he's going to deal with this. Now, what Principal Makhanya did there was to reduce me into a liar.
Yes.
Now, comrades, I want to say it in front of him that I'm not a liar. Somebody is lying. But that person is not you. Comrades, without further ado, what we said, Comrade TSG, is that even though as the SRC, we are the vanguard and mouthpiece of students, ours is to speak on your behalf. Yes. What we said is that after the principal has responded to what we've put down, we are going to take a few hands, less than 3, so that you comrades can engage him directly, can ask him on your queries. Maybe one that I can add. We have a crisis, comrades, of lecturers who don't respond to their emails.
Yes. Even the e-tutors.
Labantu makabane bad must fail.
Sure.
They don't want us to graduate.
Just doing.
Now we want to know what the principal's office is doing about lazy lecturers who don't respond to our emails. And maybe lastly, Professor Makhanya, we have said it very clearly. And I was at Unisa Radio, I said this. There's a college in town called PC Training and Business College. When you register at PC Training and Business College, you get a tablet. Yes. Now, do the maths. Compare PC Training and the University of South Africa.
Yes.
University of the that is forcing you and I to do online modules with that. Whether or not you have a gadget, the university doesn't care. Now it's a pity because Professor Haveng, our naming and shaming, Professor Haveng and Professor Mashile are not here. We went with colleagues of the SRC and those professors said, and I was new here, it was my first year, 2013 they said, we are going to provide you gadgets by next year. Today is 2015. What is that, comrades? Another Principal, Professor, we are asking you to respond on these questions and on what is seemingly lies. Professor Makhanya, what we are saying is that we engage with you, we engage with management, and this is a drastic measure because we feel that management is not meeting us halfway. Mandla, so comrades, I'm going to give the principal a chance to respond. High moral.
High discipline.
Discipline.
High moral.
Now, as I'm going to allow the principal to speak to us, I'm going to ask you very nicely, the same respect that you are affording me as your chairperson as I speak. Please afford it to him. He must speak a mouthful. If he wants to deliver a doctoral thesis, it must be only on this. He can speak for 6 hours, but only on this.
Yes.
He must give us solutions. We don't want anything else but solutions. Yes. Then after that, comrades, we'll give you a chance If you are disagreeing, which is a very dangerous thing, if you are disagreeing, you'll get a chance to disagree. Amanda, awethu, siyasifuna impendulo siyasifuna. Siyasifuna impendulo siyasifuna.
But perhaps before you run, can we agree that this was only delivered on Friday, not 2 weeks ago?
Not on Friday.
Last week Wednesday. Not 2 weeks. Not 2 weeks.
High moral,
High discipline.
discipline.
High moral.
When you speak at the same time, comrades, angeke sibe meeting.
Oh,
Ngithe sizovuma uzosiphakamisa isandla uzokhuluma.
okay.
So uprincipal asho into ekitazayo ibani.
Okay.
Siyabona.
Okay, no,
So we agree.
Thank you very much. I think I'm mixing the days because
Yeah, last week.
I was
Last
in
week.
Addis Ababa last week.
Yeah.
On the first matter here, the unilateral decision by management on acceptance fees of 1,020 payable in 10 days. Perhaps what is important for me is to explain where this one is coming from so that there can be a context. I do not know about the consultation part, because I'm not involved in it. But where this comes from, I think let's just look at what is expected of higher education. That universities as a whole are expected to develop their own enrollment plans. And then those enrollment plans are then submitted to the councils of each university. And beyond councils, if they accept those enrollment plans, they then get submitted to the Minister for Education and Training. Now, the enrollment plan that we're talking about runs from now until 2019. What the enrollment plan does is that it basically identifies quantums that each university must actually enroll. Why they do so, it's because it has to do with the subsidy from the side of the state. So what the state actually is doing for the next cycle is to have a very clear sense of how many students are going to be expected to enroll in the sector as a whole. Now, having said that, what then follows beyond the enrollment plan having been accepted and approved by the minister is that universities then have to submit to their own councils their own enrollment management plans. Now, the enrollment management plans have to take into account what is going to happen at each and every level of our qualification. Just to give an example, if you are talking about business management, you then have to accept that at this day and age, we have enrolled almost 43% of our students in that particular area, for argument's sake. Now, the enrollment plan then says, we cannot, as a university, have 43% in business management, but will rather lower that to 38% in order to increase the number at other levels. Because we are talking here about the spread that has to be accepted from each institution that is actually going to be making a contribution in the sector. Now, after that has happened, because it is necessary for us to understand where the problem actually has arisen. After that has then happened, what is then expected from universities is that as and when they enroll, they are bound by those enrollment plans. So now enrollment management then kicks in to say, if you have promised to enroll 38% in this particular area, you have to enroll 38%. Because if you under-enroll, let's say you come out at 30%, the state punishes you for that particular difference because you have under-enrolled. If you happen to go beyond the 38%, let's say you end up at 40%, once more the state punishes you for the 2% that is in excess. What we then decided from the side of the university was that it is important for us not to under-enroll because that will actually be a problem. If we so happen to over-enroll in a smaller percentages, because this is something that will be very difficult to manage, what we will then be doing as a university is that we will seek council's approval that such students will then not be excluded from the system, that the university will have to fork out from its own resources a guarantee that such students, even if they don't have the subsidy from the state, will not be excluded from the system. That is basically how that works. Now, what then happened was, let us then work out an enrollment management that is going to guarantee an enrollment management that is going to guarantee that we indeed deliver on that particular commitment. Now, this enrollment management that our colleagues then prepared takes into account a number of factors. One is a question of race, so that we are guaranteed that in terms of race, we don't end up in a situation where the admissions are skewed in favor of one group at the expense of the other. Remember that the institutions are bound by law to ensure that the numbers that we bring in the higher education sector actually live up to our own demographics. But secondly, another criterion that has to be taken into account is a socio-economic situation of each student that actually seeks entry at the university, so that we again don't end up in a situation where the students who end up being admitted are students who come from middle-class families or rich family backgrounds and so on, so that we are guaranteed that students who come from our own family backgrounds, poverty-stricken family backgrounds, get entry into universities and so on. So all those factors are built into the system. Now what the system then has to do is to work out an APS system, which is a point system that says, when I come in with my matric, that says I've passed subject Y in this percentage, subject X in that percentage, and so on, it then provides a calculation that is worked out of the base of the APS to say that I have sought to enroll for a Bachelor of Accounting, for argument's sake. Now, it then immediately says, unfortunately, you have failed mathematics at higher grade level. So for that reason, you can't enroll in accounting, but rather you can be enrolled in an alternative qualification. So all that information is provided because what it does is to allocate students at various categories. Now, once that process then has been completed, which is where the fee then came in, the argument then was that, how do we then guarantee that the students who are then allocated end up being part and parcel of the system? Then the agreement was, we then have to ensure that we bring them in with an understanding of taking a smaller percentage, which will then be an average at a third of at least 3 modules. Because we say students who are coming in may have an interest of enrolling for 3 modules and above. So taking then a third of the cost of each module at about 1,360, that it worked out to about 340 rands. Then the argument was that if you take on average, they'll be talking about 3 modules, or in excess of 3, then it will then push it up because it'll be 340 times 3. That is basically where this figure actually comes from. Now, it is not an amount that is deposited into a vacuum and disappears, but rather it is an amount that is deducted from the cost of the qualification. Now, the understanding is that when all these developments actually take place, that they are discussed with all the affected parties. So that is basically the contestation currently, because I'm not aware, Mr. Sindani, about those particular consultations and how they unfolded and how actually they have been understood. But the information at my disposal at the level where it was presented at Senate, which is where I actually chair, but also when it was presented to Council, this is basically the information that we have. So now the question that is raised here is that the very fact that it is in place will then bring about exclusions of students. That's a point. Now that is a point that we need to discuss, because we need to remember here that we also have students who in the main are funded by NSRC. Now the question is, how does NSRC then in fact address a situation like this one? So this is a matter that obviously needs to be taken up. When this matter came up for the first time, on my lap, by your fellow student leaders in the Durban campus, we actually said our preference would be in this instance to invite the executive director of NSRC to address the students on all these matters, because at the core of all the questions is finance. Because when you look at all the questions that are being raised, I mean, we have the issues, but at the core, it is finance. So that part we obviously need to be looking at. And I mean, we need to get a way of ensuring that it does actually pop in here so that we can have that focused discussion with him together with yourself. Now, the question of the exam venues that were moved. What happened with these exam venues is that you will note that we have hired exam venues because as a university we do not have our own facilities, so we depend on the support that we get from outside. Now, it's a very interesting development, by the way, because it's part and parcel of transformation of the institution. This university, for as long as it has existed, examinations were taken up in the city centers. Now, as part and parcel of transformation, we then said it is incumbent upon us to take these opportunities to areas where the majority of people are, which is where townships then came in, which is where our villages came in, and so on. So it's a fairly new arrangement. Now, it came with a challenge in the sense that, as I say, we do not have those facilities. Then we have to rent the facilities. Now, the renting of facilities is contractual. We have contractual obligations. So each time, we'll be getting a service provider that says, we can provide you with a facility for the next 3 years. Now, we say these are the conditions. The venues must be cleaned. The venues must be having air conditioners. The venues must have security when students are writing and so on. Because we have to at least get the minimum commitment from the service providers. So this is what has happened. And then with some of the venues that have now been closed, they were closed mainly as a result of the fact that the contracts came to an end. That is basically what happened. The contracts came to an end. When contracts come to an end, you can either renegotiate for extension or the contract lapses. And then you look for an alternative. Now, in venues where the contracts lapsed and were not renewed, there were specific issues that the university had raised with the service providers to say that we have not complied on the following. And for that reason, we are not going to be part and parcel of what we are doing. We'll rather seek the alternatives. So, which is what our colleagues have been doing. Now, that information is also something that still needs to be communicated to the student leaders. But that's basically what has happened in this particular instance. And my understanding at this point from the submission that the team that I sent to do the investigation is that the City Council did make some venues, available directly instead of going via the service providers. So now we need to actually look at that and see the kind of space that we are talking about and the comfort that such venues actually provide. Now the question of the plotting about the one application per academic year. This has also been prompted by the enrollment plan, because the enrollment plan says you cannot afford to exceed the numbers at any given point in time. Now the university assessed what this means and said if we have 2 application processes annually, we will not be in a position to control the numbers that we're talking about. Whereas if we have one application system that covers both semesters, you stand a better chance of having control on that particular process. Because what then you do, you don't spend all your time with processing applications, but you process applications at once and you stand a better chance of delivering the materials to students on time. Because if you can run into trouble with the first semester, you stand a better chance in the second semester because students will already be in the system. And all universities, by the way, are in that particular system. It was only Unisa that was operating differently. But now it is bound by the enrollment management that is now in place, which is not something that the university chose to do on its own. Now, the question of the poor ICT systems, and workflow, I don't think I need to defend that because I know that there is a challenge. It's poor. So what we need to do there is to ensure that we address the weakness of our ICT systems, because to argue that, well, it is working will actually be to waste your time, because that's a problem that we've been talking about, more often than not. And then the question of the fee increment. 2 days. E-modules. Yeah, the e-modules are only in one section, right? The signature modules. Not all of them. The signature modules. What is happening with the signature modules, you will note that because we had acknowledged that we have a challenge of technology or of the gadgets generally, that would be important to use the offline technology, which was actually the very first one to be introduced by this university, which is
The DigiBand.
first of its kind in terms of technology advancement that students are using. You can actually work offline with that armband technology. As soon as you get to an opportunity that is provided by the university with our own facilities, once you connect that particular armband, we automatically capture all the data that you require on the basis of the work that we have done. So that is part and parcel of the technology that we have to continue developing. Because the reality is that as a country, as the region on this continent, we do know that access to technology is coming obviously at a huge cost. It's unequal in the sense that you find that broadband availability is in some pockets of our own country. Some areas do not have that at all. But the bottom line is that the university is also experiencing other problems because at the same time, our semesters are so short. Now, if we don't transition ourselves into a technology environment where we can have direct interaction with our own students, it will become virtually impossible for students to complete their own study periods and be in a position to ready themselves to write exams, because the semester is so short, it's almost 3 months. But within those 3 months, there are so many things that have to happen to write assignments, to get feedback from lecturers and so on. So you find that in many instances, by the time you write, we have not even received feedback. And that itself is a problem, because we do not want a situation where you go to write examinations and you do not know whether you are performing or not performing. Because the intention at the end of the day is that our students must succeed. I think there is no intention from the part of the university for our own students to fail. Those people who believe that have missed the point altogether. Because the understanding is that we must be in a position to teach. When we do teach and we succeed in that area, we must always gauge that by the learning process that is taking place among our own students. Because at the end of the day, we have to account for the resources that we're investing in. Now, I want to assure you that when it comes to the investments in education, the amounts that we pay are subsidized by the state. That is why I spoke about the subsidy. Now, for the state, we also need to account. We can't go on saying to the state, it does not matter, as long as we have 400,000 students, it covers us as a university, because that is not the point. The point that we have to prove to our own government is that if we talk about having this number, what is the percentage that passes each time, so that we can then look at the throughput of our own students. So the question of the investment that is being made is such a critical point, so it can't be taken for granted. So that is why we need to look at various means. These are things that we need to discuss, because we need to look at various means that can guarantee that we are there to assist the students to progress with their own studies. Because it is costly to study. We can't actually argue that the fees that are paid, should be taken for granted. And then the fee increment, that whenever fee increments happen, they are always taking place in accordance with the CPI, the Consumer Price Index. Because what that does is that it always tries to equate a specific amount of money to the amount that is current at any given point in time. So if I'm talking about 100 rands today, the 100 rands that I have today, the following financial year will actually be less than 100 rands, with almost, if you think about the CPI, with that particular 6% of the CPI. So now what we have to do in order to guarantee that we keep the same amount as we move into the future is to consistently work out the CPI into all our commitments and commitments. But this is also not supposed to be unilateral. The understanding is that once the proposal has been made, the matter must then be taken up with the student leadership. Once more, this is the understanding from my side, that once this matter had actually been taken up, that student leadership was then engaged. So you see, there are those kinds of dynamics that for me are difficult at times to answer, because the memo simply says students are not part of this. Okay? Now, this one where I talk about the lazy lecturers. It's a tough one. Yes. Because we do not want any lazy member of staff, whether we are lecturing or you are a support member of staff or you are part of security and so on. As long as you are a member of staff, you cannot afford to be lazy. Because all of us are here to work. So if we are lazy, then it means that we are stealing from the university. Because you can't be paid without doing your work. So the question then of staff members who are lazy is something that we need to address. So once more, I can't defend myself on this one. I can't say, well, look, I think there's a problem there because we need to up our game and ensure that we do our work. Right, and then you talk about bullies, and bullying tactics amongst members of management. Of course, we need to address that. Because we, as a university, are also saying we need to address bullying and bullying tactics, even amongst staff members themselves.
The legal department also.
Yeah. So, I mean, that we obviously need to be looking at so that we can obviously be in a position to at least talk the language that we can all accept. NSRC, to include all the benefits, that need to go the way of the beneficiaries. This is a matter that, once more, I would like us to take up with NSRC, because it is not the first time, as you've rightly indicated, that this matter has actually been raised. But you see, what NSRC has been doing is to allocate resources to Unisa students in the context of an understanding that we are the students that don't reside in campuses. So they don't have the cost of residence fees, they don't have the cost of meals and what have you and so on. But the reality, which is actually has been tested as well from the side of the department, is that we do have students in our midst who actually are dependent on NSRC for virtually everything, who do not have even a meal because they don't have any other source of funding. So that's a matter that obviously we need to take up, with NSRC. But what we need to do on the point of view of how NSRC works is that we need to assist NSRC. And I think student leaders must also contribute in this one. Because we find that NSRC runs out of resources where some students who don't qualify to be funded end up actually getting NSRC funded. That is a huge problem. Now the students who deserve to be funded end up being excluded simply because of the manner in which we do not have any proper control processes in place in order to prevent that particular process from happening. That has been tested, to be true. So that is a matter that needs attention. And as I say, we need to take it up with Mr. Doctor, who is in charge of NSRC in this matter. And then this clean and sufficient, and conducive study space.
Building 15.
I think that one, obviously, our director will have to speak to that because we are making facilities available. But of course, if they are not clean and they are not safe, as I indicated, then there is a problem. Because we do want students to be protected as and when they are studying in those areas. And then, the question of e-learning. We are not yet part and parcel of e-learning. E-learning is a complex area because e-learning will mean that not a single soul will be here to speak to me. That is what e-learning is about. E-learning, the entire transaction is online. It's a virtual environment. I've consistently said this university is not a virtual university. So for that reason, we still maintain the fact that our adoption of technologies are meant to assist us to succeed in our own studies, not with an intention of becoming an e-learning university. But that is not where we want to go. We are going to be consistently making investments in our facilities because we know that our students are going to need these facilities. It doesn't mean that 2 years down the line they will say, well, I'm not coming to the university campus because I have all the necessary gadgets in my own home and the broadband and so on. Because we know that it's not likely to happen. But we do know for a fact that 15 years or 20 years down the line, that problem would have disappeared. Because this country is making investment, because this is part and parcel of socio-economic development. It is consistently making investments in the ICT domain. Now, the calculations are very simple, that beyond a decade, we will have crossed this hurdle. But for now, there's no way that we can actually say we are there. So we need to move systematically with an understanding that we'll be getting there as time moves on. And then reverse illegal decisions. Now, we need to talk about this one because, you know, you say they are illegal simply because of an understanding that there's not been any consultation. Now, we need to talk about it because these matters have already gone the entire route of approval to the council. Now, that can't be illegal because once those processes have been concluded, they make them legal. Now, what we need to start understanding and unlocking for ourselves is where did things go wrong so that we can actually then be in a position to negotiate that. And then the flouting of policies. Of course, we can't allow anyone else to flout a policy. We have a compliance office that demands that everyone else must comply. If you fail to comply, we get rid of you. It's as simple as that. So we can't allow that. So if you can identify, Mr. Chairman, individuals who are flouting these policies, because then we need to actually address that because it compromises everything else that we have to do. So that is why I'm saying that we need to do all these things that we're talking about in a transparent fashion because at no point should we be working against our own students. The reality is that we are here and we are our own students, regardless of all the issues that we are raising. Because I can understand that from your own point of view, you see management as enemies. We can't be your enemies. We certainly cannot be your enemies. We are like your own families. When we are at home, you can be fed up with your mother or your father. But you can't say, now I'm demanding that you must leave my home. Because at the end of the day, they remain your parents. Now, this is what we have to agree. That we are at a university, the bottom line is that management remains at the university because they have to manage the institutions. But the issues must be addressed. So that's a reality that we have to deal about because at the end of the day, we need to make progress on all these particular issues. And then the rationalization process that needs to be open, you know, and not run as a secret agenda. Of course, we need to address that, you know, but I mean, the point for me is also a bit complicated, you know, because I'm not sure which rationalization process we actually refer to. Or it's still going back to the exam benefits. It's still going back to the exam benefits. Okay, no. Let's handle that because that once more is within the domain, you know, of our registrar. But then I wanted to talk about the issue that we raised of the taxis. That, I mean, I'm sorry about that. There was no intention to lie because it is not a lie. What we had done about this problem, because we knew that it's posing a threat, a security threat, we don't want you to be injured in whatever way, let alone dying as a result of the problem. We raised the matter with the executive mayor of the city of Tshwane, as we had indicated. Of course, the understanding at that stage was that once they introduce these buses that are linked to the Gautrain, it will automatically remove that particular space of the taxis. Unfortunately, we had to go back to him to say that did not happen. So we're still sitting with the problem. And what I've now done is to request Dr. Fikeni from my office to go back to the executive mayor to say we need to find a solution because the problem actually is continued, unabated. And then this particular matter is actually continuing, is right here, but the executive mayor is committed to addressing this concern. So he's looking at the alternative for the taxis, because remember that the major crisis for us is that that is a public road. So as a university, even if we express our desire not for them to park there, we don't have any local standing on the road itself because we are running our own facility here as a university. That is a public space, so which means that until such time that there's an agreement from the side of those authorities who have at least that particular local stand in that area, we will then be in a position to resolve that. But we are continuing to address it. I mean, we've not actually lost sight of that particular matter. And I know that that was one matter that you raised at the end, Chairman. But which is another one that I missed? Yeah. So those are the issues. And by the way, and by the way, we want to say to you that our student leaders will actually be part and parcel of these discussions that we are handling with the executive mayor, so that there can be an understanding that we are not simply just saying we don't want taxis to operate, but we are looking at a security issue, because students will actually be there to also express that themselves. So that's basically where we are.
No, thank you very much, Vice Chancellor. Comrades, please put your hands down. In this meeting, we ask
Why not here? Okay.
But Professor Makhanya, I must say, on behalf of the NSRC, the response on the taxi rank is not satisfactory. None of the students here are satisfied with that response. We are not happy with that response. In fact, we reject that response. And we have the moral authority to reject the response on this taxi rank, because this response is the same response you gave on the 22nd of June. In May, we asked the same question. The response was the same. So students were there, we were there. We cannot be satisfied with the response, the same answer to the same question, and there's no solution. So we're not happy with this taxi rank, and we would like a different response. Now, Professor Makhanya, secondly, our conclusion that this policy is illegal is indeed correct. Nothing about us without us. Correct. Professors, they can sit in councils, they can sit in Senate, they can sit in Mencom, but if they don't consult us, then it's illegal. That is our interpretation of illegal. Now, there's no mistake here. The National SRC in drafting this memorandum were correct in saying that these policies are illegal, and therefore we declare unapologetically that they must be reversed. And that is the response from Makhanya we wanted. Unless, of course, it sits well with you and your management that you can implement decisions about students without consulting them and say that they are legal. From where we stand, that is illegal. And people in my law textbooks, Professor Makhanya, people who participate in illegal activity